Hello, Charlie TCG here. Welcome back to Looking Ahead, the series where I break down and analyze the meta, what's happening over in Japan, and how that'll impact our one. Today is a really exciting episode. We're going to look at the impact of Paradox Rift has had to the Japanese meta. As we know, it was released this past weekend to the City Leagues, and boy oh boy, has it shaked up the meta quite drastically. We get it released this weekend, so it's really good and impactful to see the first impressions about what the top players in Japan are really playing in the City Leagues to give us a big shape of how the meta is evolving. Some of it is a big surprise, like Rory Moon doing pretty well over the past weekend, and some other surprise where Iron Hands wasn't as dominating as a lot of people thought it would do, but definitely a lot of people respected it, while some archetypes were definitely played a lot less. So without further ado, let's jump in to see the meta share about what the top 16s were like in the City Leagues this past weekend. As we can see, it has changed a lot since we covered it a couple of weeks ago. We can see here that Lost Tina is still up there in the top percentage by being 17.7%. It gains Counter Catcher, which is pretty much boss's orders when you're behind in prizes. This is absolutely incredible for Lost Tina, where it can afford to kind of like use the Abyss Seeking with Giratina early on, go behind in prizes, then you can really capitalize on your Chorus Experiment as well as Counter Catcher, which is pretty much boss's orders in that sort of stage, which is absolutely incredible for how this deck is evolving. Rory Moon is a very powerful archetype in Japan. As I mentioned before, Japan really focuses on that best of one format. And as we know, Tina is very strong in best of one format. Rory Moon also gains that as well. By having that donking capability, by that constant pressure of pretty much doing 220 damage or instantly KOing your opponent's active Pokemon, is incredibly strong. It's definitely evolving. A lot of people are really enjoying the sort of changes by adding that Brute Barnet, pretty much doing that additional 10 damage, but definitely Rory Moon needs in certain archetypes which can KO like so Tyranitar, Entei, as well as also itself and Iron Hands. So it's very powerful. Charizard dropping down to 11.1% is definitely a little bit of a change as well, but making that room for some of the new archetypes to kind of go around there. It's definitely evolving to having that devolution TM by adding more Charmeleons and the evolution TM to really counteract any of those sort of problems. The big user of Iron Hands, Chien-Pao and Miraidon, are both tied with being 10.4%, so nearly 20% of the metagame, over 20%, was in fact Iron Hands. It didn't actually perform as well, which we're going to cover in just a second, but definitely a lot of people were respecting that by seeing the release of kind of like the dwindle of Gardevoir and Lost Box. Lost Box was already on the decline over there in Japan because of the likes of release of Jirachi, but having Gardevoir drop from pretty much being like the third and second place archetype all the way down to like 5.9%. It's one of the lowest it's been in Japan ever since Paldean Evolved was releasing their sort of set things back in April time. So that's a huge difference and dwindle for the archetype. Mew, because they didn't really gain many things as well, kind of really capitalizes on that sort of gain as well. It goes up to 9%, so it really helps with kind of like the DTE build. Like for us, it's more of a handlock DTE build, but in Japan, they're still playing around with the fusion build as well as also that handlock archetype, but not really focusing on the luxury, which is what we're really common for our one. Some of the other newer archetypes is doing very well. Gholdengo, it's already a really established archetype, which already did pretty okay, but it gained Earthen Vessel, kind of like really capitalizing on reusing most of your energies in your deck, but really going back to the Basculegion archetype, we can use huge amount of damage and shuffle all your energies in, which I definitely struggled in my early testing about Gholdengo, really struggled in the late game to constantly have the energy flow turn after turn after turn. Now I'm Valiant as a deck which I definitely should respect a lot more by that donking capability, what it has to offer, having Urshifu, which is really key in the sort of matchup. I really am a big fan of it, and Lugia kind of dwindles a little bit, but still doing very well overall. So I really like this because if we translate that to the other top 6 archetypes which have been performing over the City League, Charizard is back on top. We've mentioned a lot of it. Pretty much Charizard right now in Japan is BDIF. Huge amount of damage, very difficult to KO, and an incredible ability to set up multiple attackers. Charizard is doing very well. Some archetypes even adapted to adding Iron Hands into the list because the turn 2 Iron Hands attack is very strong for Charizard, where Path to Peak isn't played as much, but after this weekend, I feel like people should definitely be going back to adding Path to Peak into the archetype. Lost Tina and Rory Moon, 2 archetypes which are very powerful in the best of one format, both tied with having 3 wins, which is very strong here. And if we look at the rest of the results here, it's performing incredibly well, which I absolutely love to see. Like I mentioned, I'm going to talk a bit more about these archetypes as well, talking about why I think Lost Tina is very strong with Counter Catcher, and Rory Moon, the difference of builds to play, the huge turbo capability of the deck is incredible. Gholdengo and Mew both tied at 2. It's very interesting to see. I like that Gholdengo is seen a lot more like and love. I think the Earthen Vessel has really helped this sort of Gholdengo with its consistency. I understand my testing is very strong to have that, but a lot of people do play the lesson of encouragement still because that's very powerful. You're normally going to be, you kind of have a Gimmighoul or a Basculegion, Basculin in the active spot. They only have like very weak HP, so the Garant kind of always could be KO. So Earthen Vessel plus a letter of encouragement, recommendation, I forget what it's actually called, getting that 5 energies for the cost of like discarding 1 is very key. Mew, like I mentioned, it doesn't gain too much, and people need to respect it a lot more. I think with having Charizard and Rory Moon, 2 dark type and very strong archetypes right now, which are very susceptible and very good matchup into a Mew VMAX. They're very good into Mew VMAX. Mew could definitely struggle, maybe dwindle a little bit, but it's only the early game of the metagame. We've had 2 days of results here, so we're going to see how that is really going to evolve as it goes along. And Miraidon actually beat Chien-Pao by getting multiple more second places than Chien-Pao actually did. They're both tied on getting a few wins as well. It definitely feel like it works a lot better in Miraidon. They have adapting by adding DTE to the list, because if you pretty much use 4 of your electric generators, if you're going in second to try and like get your Iron Hands, it gets KO'd in response. You're very, very weak because you've used pretty much all your generators and relying on just an attachment and a flapping if you manage to get that set up. So definitely going to the DTE, kind of taking that 20 damage less is okay about it if you can kind of like constantly save a load more of your energies. So without further ado, let's jump into talk to you exactly why I think some of these archetypes are very strong. So let's start off by looking at Roaring Moon, and there are definitely 2 different versions of the archetype. This is a more turbo build way of kind of pretty much gunning in for that turn 1 attack, which is very, very key. I love the Morpeko, which is really, really powerful in a new set, by giving you your free retreat option and free retreat pivot if you don't have any energies attached to it, which definitely Roaring Moon definitely needs. By constantly having these huge amount of switching cards out with the escape rope and cross switches is very powerful. It really leans into the likes of the Pokestop by kind of like drawing through your deck as quick as possible. We have Rotom, we have Squawkabilly, we have Lumineon, we also have Gholdengo, so many really key cards, as well as Mew, to try to draw through your deck as quick as possible, try and get that turn 1 attack, which I absolutely love. You may notice there are a few key cards which are missing from this archetype. They aren't even playing the Ancient Booster energy. Now, I do like that in this roaming, but I'm going to talk about it in just the next list I'm going to look at too, which is about why I think it's a lot more important. But this one here is pretty much pure turbo, pure aggression, which honestly is very, very strong. This one, I think, is a lot better and cleaner. It still has that aggressiveness by having that Squawkabilly, huge high counts of VIP parts and Gholdengo, but it really helps you in the late game as well. Having that 1/2/2 line of Bibarel. Bibarel is absolutely must in this sort of deck here. With the last one, you'll pretty much focus your absolute turbo aggressiveness. If you don't get the setup where you need, you can be really, really the struggle in the late game, and that's why I love having the Bibarel in there. Still has the Morpeko. Having the 2 of is definitely really important, I believe, but you could probably sacrifice the 1, but having that free retreat pivot is so strong. But it has the Brute Barnet. Brute Barnet means if it's got Ancient Booster energy attached to it, both active Pokemon are poisoned. Now, if you attach that to the Roaring Moon says that if there's booster energy attached to it, it's not affected by special conditions. So it's an incredibly really strong card, and it might mean that you can hit to that 230 damage with its first attack by discarding a Stadium card and not relying on putting 200 damage on you. That's incredibly powerful, especially in the mirror match, helping Teal likes of Lugia, but also likes of Charizard. Having a really good matchup in stat is absolutely incredible. Still plays multiple really good and switching cards in this one. Clap Stadium to get rid of that cheeky Squawkabilly in the late game, and having that Pressasada, you need that one to be at least 5, not 5, could be a 4 of, which is absolutely really important to really help that synergy by attaching it to your Roaring Moons and drawing through cards. This deck is incredibly explosive, incredibly consistent, it seems like it, and doing incredibly well in Japan. I'm really excited to see how it's going to progress and evolve in the format. The other one I want to talk about is Gholdengo. It only gained 1 new card because we've had it for about a month over in Japan. It gained that Ancient Vessel, which gets you to discard a card and draw and search your deck for 2 energies, which is very, very powerful. Like I mentioned, it does play the Basculegion. What I like about having a Basculegion in this archetype is really, really strong because it has the Basculin and Basculegion. Basculegion means for free energy, like pretty much no energy attached, 20 times the amount of energies you shuffle back into your deck. This is really, really strong. It helps you in your Charizard matchup, and more specifically, it helps you by not really relying on too much on their superior energy retrieval. I played multiple games in my testing sort of things of Gholdengo where you're not getting the right of the energies across to it, because you have to you make sure you have the right amount of cards in the deck, you make right sure that you have the right amount of energies, right? You need like the superior energy retrieval or even just energy retrieval in general, but having the Basculegion really helps you in the late to mid game where you can really rely on the likes of Gholdengo draw and having the work and Avery, multiple really good disruptive supporters against your opponent, but also drawing loads of cards, really help you draw back into the energy, especially in the late game. I really like this aggressive build of Gholdengo. I love having Squawkabilly. Definitely a little bit focusing a little bit less on the Battle VIP parts, but having a Basculin, also having the Gimmickle, which have that call for family, is very, very key, especially in this sort of archetype, which I really like how Gholdengo could really solidify itself. Now I thought, why not just mention Chien-Pao? This is different from my early list, which I posted a couple of weeks ago. That was from my early testing, and I do kind of recognize that maybe 2 Iron Hands isn't as strong as I kind of thought about, especially with likes of Heavy Ball in this sort of format. This person definitely kind of respected that as well. Having a Heavy Ball, having that Earthen Vessel, kind of like easy way to kind of like get some of those energies you really require, and getting that more ways to get the energies instead of relying too much on the likes of energy search. Earthen Vessel kind of plus a Shivery Chill pretty much equals 4 energies, which I absolutely love in this deck as well. I think having Bibarel is still very, very strong. I also love that focusing more on supporter build as well. Because they're still playing the Pokestop, you may think like maybe Crosswitcher could be helpful, but they're also not running the likes of Calcium Clone. I do think that's okay. I think cutting the Calcium Clone for Iron Hands is definitely the way to go. I'm learning that from my testing things, because I was away for a bit. I've gone back into my testing sort of thing, got matched with Furia as well, and I do think this is more of the build which I believe is where Chien-Pao Iron Hands could really evolve. Granted, it didn't have a great showing over this past weekend, but there's still multiple more tournaments to kind of go before we get to LAIC, so I'm really excited to see how the format is going to develop and really accomplish Iron Hands of Chien-Pao, and could it actually be BDIF? The other one I want to talk about is this Miraidon winning list, and this is a big toolbox or version. Only playing 2 copies of Miraidon, but also 2 copies of Iron Hands is definitely a bit of a interesting sort of take. I definitely may have gone to a 3 Miraidon and 1 Iron Hand, and maybe chucking in, if you have space for that heavy ball, because you're playing multiple one-offs, it might be really helpful to really have that. It could help you in these other matchups. There's definitely more of a toolbox. I like the Mew, but you really need like the 2 flapping to really get it properly set up, because you're not really going to, you can't elect generator to it, or you just have to have that attachment before, or potentially even the likes of that DTE can really help with it. Like I mentioned, DTE is very, very strong in this deck. Like I mentioned, it can help with the Mew, but also more specifically help with the Iron Hands. You're not sacrificing too many electric generators. You can in theory use 1 electric generator and just use it to get 2 energies attached to Iron Hands, or 1 electric generator and an attachment, which all of a sudden you're not utilizing and wasting a ton of your resources, which I absolutely think is absolutely key in Miraidon matchup, where but kind of if you fall behind in prices at all, it's definitely difficult to kind of keep up with it. And if you waste all your resources on 1 attacker and they KO it, you don't have anything to respond to. So I generally really like that sort of impact. I think they definitely respect Mew a lot by having the likes of the Drapion, but it's definitely something you could potentially cut away with, because you still have that Raichu. But again, they might think if they're playing Iron Hands, that might not particularly be needed. I really like this list overall, and I think it's definitely powerful as well. Kind of going away from the Path to Peak build, focusing more on the Beach Core and even the Potown Store is very, very strong. So looking at this Charizard, like I mentioned before, it does play the Evolution TM, as well as also having 3 copies of Charmeleon. Charmeleon, I think, is very, very key as well. Having a 4-3-3 line of Charizard, it sounds very strange, like we're used to that with Gardevoir, but having it in Charizard and only 1 rare candy is definitely something which I feel like this list is really going to evolve into it. Playing the Bibarel instead of the Pidgeot means kind of like respecting Path to Peak a lot more. It can kind of be that aggressiveness and kind of like affecting the late sort of game. Manaphy plus Jirachi is very, very key. It's also having the Mew. Mew also helps with that draw factor, but also can help in other sort of matchups as well by getting an additional few draw cards, which you might potentially need. If your opponent has 1 Giratina V-Star in play and you get to KO with Mew and they have no backup as well, nothing can really KO it in response from there. They're mostly doing is maybe like 12 damage counters with Sableye only to Mew, and if it can't get KO'd, it's very, very strong in this sort of game as well. I like having the evolution, because if you're going second, kind of game utilizing one of your Beetdoofs or even the Charmanders or even like a Mew EX, having that in play, evolving 2 of your your Charmanders into that Charmeleons is very, very key in the matchup. Going back to the Armor build is very, very strong. As well as also the Better Churros, like basically the return of AZ. Try to pick up any of your opponent's Pokemon. One of your Pokemon is very, very strong. Pretty much removing any of the threats like the Pokemon you might potentially start if you don't really need, or more specifically, the Luminion to utilize in a later game is absolutely key. And I really love how this Charizard list is evolving. And this could potentially see how Charizard lists are kind of going to adapt into the future to really be worried about the likes of the Evolutions TM, which is kind of going around the meta game. Like I mentioned before, Lostina here, I love this build as well, but having that 1 copy of Countercatcher. We're not going to need a ton of it because we don't really need that. We need that additional boss's orders, plus with the likes of Pulse Correspondent. You can draw into it and then gust one of your opponent's Pokemon you might need to have. You're going to focus more on Abyss Seeking in the early game as well, kind of be affording to go a little bit behind in prizes. I like how it's still one of the only decks which really focused on Path to Peak, and it still plays that 2-1 split of Roxanne and Iono. I absolutely love that as well as having the likes of Pokegear to really help you draw into any of the supporters you might potentially need. This Lostina list, I think, is exactly how the format is going to evolve. To really, it can affect in sort of the metagame. Nothing really too much has changed about it. I really like this list. I think it's really consistent. I feel like this is a build I'm going to kind of go with it. It's not respecting Sableye, because Sableye isn't played as much more, so we don't need the likes of Jirachi and Greninja. You're not really having anything like you just have your Comfeys and your Sableye, which do kind of make go away. But against Mirror Match, it might be difficult to get the Greninja out as much as possible. And against Chien-Pao, you kind of like take that sort of thing. Like you're already even enough, but you can really afford to kind of go. If you go behind, you have that counter catch really slow down the Chien-Pao list, which I absolutely like about this of how Lostina is really going to evolve and adapt. And kind of finish off, I want to look at some of the fun lists that I've actually done well here. And we're looking here at Claw. This was the archetype which a lot of people kind of thought was interesting. 30 does, and then it does initial 190 damage if it's affected by a special condition. A lot of people kind of looked at this and went, huh, that's actually not terrible for a single price Pokemon. It has 120 HP, so it's very, very strong here, and only costing a DTE. Now, what I love about it, the partner, is the Hisuian Electrode V. Now, what's very good, because it has 100 times the amount of special conditions it's attached to for 0 energies. So that's already very, very strong. It also has Burning Curry, so you can get yourself burned. You also have Brute Barnet with the ancient boost energy, so you can also get everyone poisoned, which is very, very strong and very, very powerful. Do a huge amount of damage overall. Having a Sneasel to try and pretty much get these big one-hit KOs you might potentially need, as well as also having a really cool, I believe it's Atticus is the promo card. I don't know if we're getting it in our set, but I know it's definitely a promo card over there in Japan, which pretty much means if your opponent's active Pokemon is poison, shuffle your deck and draw 7. I believe is that, or it's draw 2, 7. It's something in 7, which is very, very key and really, really good in a sort of matchup as well. There's also really good synergy as well in the late game by having the Bibarel to set up. You're having the Arven trying to get any of the item cards you might potentially need, and the tool card like attaching the Big Charm to Claw. All of a sudden it has 170 HP, which is a huge amount of damage, which is very difficult for some Pokemon to get knocked to kind of KO. As well as also getting that easy search to get that booster energy as well. I love this deck. I think it's really fun. I'm glad it actually won, did really well, and potentially could put Clawful on the map, because a lot of people were kind of talking up Clawful and this could be a really good deck, and as it actually performed pretty well and done really, really well in a City League, people might respect a lot more. It might not be a road deck and could potentially replace Lost Box by a really strong single prize attacker. And the other one I would just want to finish off as well looking at is Regi's. This Regi's is super interesting and really unique of how it's going to potentially be approaching. A lot of people love Regi's, and since a lot of the special energies have kind of like disappeared and we've had Super Return, people are trying to find ways to constantly make Regi's come back. And it got quite a few top 8 placements, and this one here is super interesting. Now you might look at here and go, Charlie, there's Iron Hands in there. We can't energy accelerate it because there's no Skyfield in play, but we do have Thornton. The reason why it's very powerful, because we have access to Countercatcher, which instantly becomes incredibly powerful in this archetype, because you can use it if you're behind in prizes, which guarantee you will be on your second turn of the game if your opponent gets a turn 1 knockout, or if they get a turn KO if you're going second as well. So you're instantly going to have access to that very easily, so you're not relying on boss's orders. You have Iono to really disrupt the opponent a huge amount of time, and Thornton. Right now, let me go into why Thornton is really powerful. Well, you can get all your Regis out and play very easily with the Ultra Ball, with the Nest Ball, with the Heavy Ball, because it's constantly drawing it with Artisan as well. So very, very easy to get all your Regis out as much as possible. You also have Regical as well. So once you've got all your Regis set up, you can energy accelerate to one of your Pokemon which you might have. And then you go Thornton, because you've got an Iron Hands and Discard pile, you already just go into that, and also bingo, bango, bongo, you draw an additional prize card. By getting an easy KO on the likes of a Gardevoir single prize Pokemon, or definitely a surprise opponent going, what the heck did you just play? I love this one. It's purely focused on just attacking with Regieleki and Regidrago. Regidrago doing 240 damage is very, very powerful, and Iron Hands can do 160 damage, as well as also draw additional prize card with a second attack, which I honestly think is very, very strong in this sort of matchup-wise. You have a good thing in Mew, because you can attack with Regigigas. It's absolutely incredible. I absolutely love how unique this approach is to Regi's, and kind of like a lot of people are saying, like, is Regi's potentially returning? It could do. I'm unsure. Like, Sableye is not as played as much as possible anymore. Gardevoir isn't as common right now because people are scared of Iron Hands. So if you want to fight them, join them. So I absolutely love this approach. I'm really excited to see that a lot of people might catch on to this Regi's build, and it really could evolve and adapt as a couple weeks go as we get excited for LAIC. So I want to finish off by looking at Rapid Strike with Iron Valiant. This list here is really interesting and unique for the top 8. Now, for me, I really wasn't really a big fan of Valiant. I thought, oh, it's all right, it's okay in the early testing. But as a few weeks kind of like went along, I was like researching, do some testing as well, looking at some other archetypes people talking about it. I realized how strong Iron Valiant is. Not only can it easily get these big one-hit KOs as quick as possible by donking with the abilities, you have to really respect in a way that you may have to bench 2 Pokemon down, because you don't know if your opponent's playing Iron Valiant, and you could potentially lose if you bench down a Frigibass. Yes, that benching a V or EX would be fine, but potentially if you just bench like a Manaphy to start with that, you could easily lose the game by just having 4 Iron Valiants, or potentially even a Metacham Yoga Loop in the next sort of turn if they are going second. I love this deck as well. It has the devolution thing, so it really helps you in the Charizard matchup and other sort of matchups as well, like Gardevoir. It also has the future boost energy as well, multiple switching cards. You're constantly kind of like reusing the switching effects by having Iron Valiant, by constantly putting loads of damage counters around the board. As well as you also have Urshifu as well. You kind of like get rid of Manaphy, and all of a sudden you have Urshifu with the team of not Manatee, over the time of Melanie, as well as also Rapid Strike Energy. You can all of a sudden do this huge amount of damage by taking multiple prizes in the turn and having a Yoga Loop to kind of gain additional turn. You might even get your opponent from not playing anything with this deck. This card is absolutely disgusting if this deck works out. But again, it's in the early stages. In a lot of testing I've seen online, but people are kind of like, oh, we've cracked it, it's going to be really powerful. Japan is definitely kind of focusing on that as well. It did get onto the graphic by being 3.4%. Will that increase over next week? I kind of hope it does, because I'm really interested in how it kind of goes with it. So I'm really excited to see how this format is going to evolve as well. And this deck here is definitely a good sleeper pick if you think about LAOC, or potentially just one of the strongest archetypes right now. So looking ahead into the next coming weeks, has Charizard adapted to really stay that BDIF? I generally think it has adapted into that one by constantly going with the Charmeleons, by having the evolution MTM. It can really stay in that top dog position and constantly do well because it has an incredible type matchup in multiple matchup ones. Roaring Moon, I generally think is going to be a strong deck. It's going to be up there as Lost Tina, but being one of the strongest archetypes for it constantly. But it's incredibly powerful in a best of one format. Having that Calamity Storm to do 220 damage, now Brute Barnet doing 230 is really, really key. And that Frenzy Gouting to pretty much get an instant KO on anything on the opponent's side is absolutely strong. So I'm absolutely a huge fan of it. And another question as well, I don't know how wrong we were about Iron Hands. Maybe it was a lot of people like early testing with it one. A lot of people may not have Iron Hands available to them. So I'm really excited to see how this format is going to evolve, and will Iron Hands actually be a really, really strong deck going into the future. So I hope you've enjoyed this archetype and video, looking at my looking ahead video. I'm going to try and get back and do some weekly videos. I am starting a new sort of job, so I'm going to try and do at least 2 videos per week. Hopefully later in the weekend, I will release my booster box opening for Paradox Rift. I'm super, super excited for this set, as well as also doing a giveaway at the end of the video. So I'm really, really excited for that as well. And hopefully you guys enjoy, and I can pull some really key cards, maybe Iron Hands or Roaring Moon or Iron Valiant. I'm just excited that we have an absolutely game-changing set upon us. So if you enjoyed the video, please make sure to like and subscribe. Comment down below, what deck are you most excited for in this format as well. As well as also some interesting archetypes you want me to see cover in the channel. I'm definitely thinking of doing a reposting of Roaring Moon as well as also Iron Valiant as well. So I will see you guys in the next couple of days for another video. See you then. Bye for now.